yourself from the material world. Al-wara' wal-iman, Arabic for piety and faith. Al-masail, again, it doesn't mean problems. Al-masail is basically fiqh questions. And that was compiled by Imam Ahmad's sons. By the way, Abu Hanifa, Malik, Al-Shafi'i, did they have any notable sons that carried ilm after them? No. No. But two of Imam Ahmad's sons became really great scholars after him. You know, I'm personally very curious. I need to study more about Imam Ahmad's for the sake of my own children. It is funny because you always see like the sons of imams and scholars are not really as notable as they are, and that really bothers me. So he also wrote another book that was called Al-Nasikh wal-Mansukh, the abrogating and the abrogated. And he also authored another book called Jawabat al-Quran, and so on and so forth. But again, it's all eclipsed by the greatness of Al-Musnad. And inshallah we'll visit this issue in a few minutes as well. Talk about Imam Ahmad's fiqh, jurisprudence. Okay, I'm going to make a statement. It's my subjective judgment. And you know, some of you might not necessarily like it, but it is not intended to cast any negative shadow on Imam Ahmad's madhab or anything like that. I think that it is not Imam Ahmad's opinions or fiqh or collection of hadith that made him into the legendary Ahmad ibn Hanbal, the founder of the Hanbali madhab. I really think it is the Imam's endurance throughout the mihna, the tribulation of the createdness of the Quran, that gave him that character and made him into a hero. Right? And the reason I say this is that compared to other scholars of his time, you know, Imam Ahmad did not produce as much fiqh as Al-Hasan al-Basri, for example, as much fiqh as, you know, Al-Shaybani or some of the other scholars. But it is because of his character throughout the mihna, it is because of his strength and endurance that he became a legend and he became a folk hero for his people. And I'm not suggesting in any way that Imam Ahmad's fiqh was not comprehensive enough to stand alone. But I'm saying that it is because of his endurance in the trial of the greatness of the Quran, more because of his endurance and less because of his fiqh, that the Hanbali madhab became what it became after, you know, this madhab that had a tremendous followers at some point. So we have a story, right? We have a story of suffering, a story of trials, a story of perseverance. The main protagonist in that story was Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal himself. The main player, the main character in that story was the great Imam. And actually, you know, I'll talk to you about this towards the end of the lecture, that most of the scholars of his time, after he died, they all gave him bay'ah, so to speak, like a pledge, to consider him on that list of the greatest 6 Muslims that ever lived. Right? And I'll talk to you about this later. It wasn't because of his ilm, again, it was because of his character. It wasn't because of his endurance. Because they thought, here's a man, old, frail, stood against a brutal state that had all the resources to do anything he wanted to do. He preserved Islamic orthodoxy as we know it today, single-handedly. And he paid a dear price for it. It was that legacy that made Imam Ahmad into the legendary founder of the Hanbali madhab. Again, this is my personal opinion, with which you may agree or disagree. But I really, just studying years of studying, you know, his legacy and his life compared to other scholars, again, I think he was mainly a muhaddith, and I kind of partially agree with Al-Tabari on this, without dismissing the great work of fiqh that he produced. But I think that his main venture was hadith, and I approach this again from a scientific standpoint. When people say that Imam Ahmad's fiqh was kind of rigid and harsh and so forth, you know, you can't help but laugh, right? Just reading this. And again, it's so funny that today we still have the same complaints, I think. You know, in general, we look at some of the, the harshest Muslims and their approach, and we call them Hanbalis, right? Which is, you know, again, not an appropriate characterization. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, let me give you some examples of his fiqh so you kind of know what I mean. The one area in Imam Ahmad's jurisprudence in which he was really, really harsh was matters of tahara, purity, ghusl and wudu, and preparing for salah and najis and stuff like that. Because for him, you gotta be careful. You are about to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you always err on the side of caution, right? He was kind of a lot more rigid when it comes to. I'll tell you in a second why rigidity became, the character or the quality of the madhab later on. But let me share with you some examples. For instance, he thinks that rinsing the mouth and blowing your nose is fard when it comes to wudu, unlike all the other scholars. Why? Why do they think that? Because he considers them to be part of your face, and washing the face is fard. So he considers nose and mouth, that's part of your face. You have to properly clean them the way you would clean your face. Other scholars obviously would disagree with that. The face is this. The face is not inside. Shafi'i used to say that when you make wudu, for example, the water is flowing on your beard because beard is not part of your face. Right? Shafi'i used to think that beard is not. Ahmad, for example, he says, no, you have to use your fingers to make sure that water reaches your skin and so on and so forth. He used to think that camel meat breaks wudu. You see where it comes from? We talked about this out the last time. Now he came up with this really amazing rule that we still use today. Doubt in breaking your wudu does not invalidate your wudu. So let's say that you woke up in the morning, you made wudu, you prayed fajr, you went to work, whatever, you went about your day, and it's dhuhr time. And then you're about to pray, but you're like, wait, I don't remember if I went to the bathroom or not. Does that invalidate your wudu? With many scholars it does, but not with Ahmad. He says, if you are not sure whether or not you broke your wudu, that doubt in and of itself doesn't break your wudu. But you have to be sure that you've already made wudu at some point. But if you doubt whether or not you made wudu in the first place, then you have to make wudu. You understand the difference between those two? A woman, for Ahmad's fiqh, can actually require her husband, like write down her marriage contract that her husband will never marry another woman while he's married to her, right? And it becomes illegal. Not only haram, because you're breaking, an injunction in a mutually agreed upon contract, it also becomes against the law. So government officials will come after you if that is what you contract. I'm talking about Hanbali. In Hanbali fiqh, a woman has the right to clearly state in her marriage contract that her husband is not allowed to marry another woman while still married to her. And it becomes illegal for him to do so. Abu Hanifa has a similar injunction in which he says, basically, a woman can have control over the marriage contract to give herself the right to divorce, to do talaq at will. The difference between talaq and khul', male and female initiated divorce. Imam Abu Hanifa says that a woman can specify in her marriage contract that she also can divorce her husband at will. You just, wake up in the morning and says, I divorce you. kind of situation. Not that they will just use it right away, but sentimentally, I think some of them might feel a lot more comfortable with it. Now, in matters of aqeedah, Imam Ahmad, again, as a response to the Mu'tazili uproar in the Muslim world, he said things that could be considered by some to be a little bit harsh. For him, for example, the Jahmis are kuffar. The Jahmiyyah is this cult from which Mu'tazili was thought was inspired, and Jahmis used to have really strange theology. If you read it, you just sit back and just be incredibly amazed, right, by the weirdness of it. So he used to think that Jahmis, and inshallah I have to tell you a little bit more about Mu'tazili thought. This is the only way you can understand what comes after with the Mihna and so forth. So anyone who said that the Quran was created for Ahmad was Jahmi and therefore is kafir. And anybody that says that the Quran is not created for Ahmad is mubtadi'. So was the Quran created or not? Because that's what Jahmis followed by the Mu'tazila, said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Allah. He's the only thing that is eternal. And anything else that is not Allah has to be created. Right? So that camera, is that camera Allah? No, then it's created. That's how the Mu'tazilis looked at it. Right? So by consequence, is the Quran Allah? No. It is Allah's word. Now, wait a second. Is Allah's word as eternal as Allah? Mu'tazilis and the Jahmis before them, they thought that was inappropriate. You can't say that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is unfathomable. He's an entity that we cannot ascribe qualities to. Human qualities, that is. So for them, anything that is not Allah is by consequence created. Anything. Right? So Imam Ahmad used to think that this is just outright stupidity. Who cares? It's just the Quran is Allah's word. If you say it was created, then you're Jahmi. That makes you kafir. And if you say it was not created, then you're just an idiot, basically. And I'll call you mubtadi'ah. I'll call you just, this is bid'ah, this is innovation in the deen. So yeah, Imam, what do you think is the solution? Just don't talk about it. It has no consequence whatsoever, for practical purposes. So take the Quran as it is Allah's word, follow it. It doesn't matter whether it was created or not created. Just some examples of his fiqh. Now, Abu Bakr al-Marudi, as I said, was one of his most ardent students, and he was with him for about 10 years. Abu Bakr al-Khalal, another Abu Bakr, was a student of al-Marudi, and Abu Bakr al-Khalal basically traveled all around the empire to collect the fiqh opinions of Imam Ahmad. That's all he did. Went after all the Imam students everywhere to collect not hadith, but to collect his fiqh, his opinions, right? However rare they were. You see how things evolve and change over time? That's precisely what the Imam did not want to do. That's what he wanted to avoid. And they're still recording his opinions. And Al-Khalal collected all the opinions of what he called the Hanbali madhab in a great compendium that was called Al-Jami' al-Kabir. If you are into fiqh, you've probably come across Al-Jami' before. And then Al-Khalal had this halaqah in the masjid in Baghdad, and in that halaqah he taught Al-Jami' al-Kabir. He became the platform in which Hanbali fiqh was created and crystallized. So you could say, for all practical purposes, that Abu Bakr al-Khalal was the true founder of the Hanbali madhab. Now, Abu Qasim al-Khiraqi, rather, was a student of Al-Khalal, and he basically took this big book, Al-Jami' al-Kabir, and summarized it into a much smaller compendium that was called Mukhtasar al-Khiraqi. And Mukhtasar al-Khiraqi, by the way, those of you who study fiqh, is one of the most popular mother books of the Hanbali madhab. Anyone who studies Hanbali madhab always studies either Mukhtasar al-Khiraqi or any of the 300 books that were written about Mukhtasar al-Khiraqi. One of the famous books that were written, again, as a summary of Mukhtasar al-Khiraqi is Imam Ibn Qudama's book, Al-Mughni. Again, how many of you heard of Al-Mughni before? It's an important book, again, in Hanbali madhab, that was written by Imam Ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi al-Hanbali. Even Imam Abdul Salam ibn Abdullah, who was the father of the grandfather of Ibn Taymiyyah, wrote a collection of fiqh opinions of the Hanbali madhab, because Ibn Taymiyyah also was Hanbali, and so was Ibn Qayyim. And he called it Al-Muharrir, the freer. And unlike possibly Imam Abu Hanifa and a little bit Shafi'i, he truly resented falsafa, philosophy and kalam. And he prevented, not discouraged, he prevented his students from embarking on any venture that has to do with falsafa and so forth. And subhanAllah, the irony is that the Imam himself became a victim of an intellectual and a very abstract undertaking later on. Now, we're going to take a break, inshallah, in about 10 minutes. But I would like to talk to you about the intellectual circumstances of his time. And when I say intellectual circumstances, I talk about really strange groups. Again, the state had evolved into the height, the summit of wealth, and people could actually afford the luxury of doing these things and talking about these things. So you have the Mu'tazila, and you need to understand what it means. Al-Mu'tazila comes from the word i'tizal in Arabic. And i'tizal means to isolate, to quit something and isolate yourself from it. And it dates back to the days of Al-Hasan al-Basri. One of his greatest students was Wasil ibn Atta. And Wasil ibn Atta used to be a student of al-Basri. Again, stayed with him for years. And then they disagreed on one theological notion. Those who commit major sins, will they eternally suffer in hell? Or will Allah eventually, after they do their time, God will eventually let them go? Al-Hasan al-Basri said, again, they're just sinners. So they will have to serve some time and then they will be emancipated. And Wasil said, no. If they committed major sins and they did not make tawbah, they did not repent, then they are deserving of God's punishment and they will suffer eternally. It doesn't matter if they're believers or not. And that's when he abandoned Al-Hasan al-Basri, and that's when they called him i'tazal al-Hasan, because he basically quit and isolated himself from the halaqah of Al-Hasan al-Basri in Basra, and that's how the Mu'tazili school of thought was created. These are some of the theological foundations of i'tizal. Because, again, with the risk of oversimplifying it, but we have, limited time, and I need to share with you some of it. Number one, at-tawheed. At-tawheed. Tawheed, we all know tawheed is the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But tawheed for them was different, a little bit different than your understanding and mine. They thought that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the minds of most people, has attributes and qualities and so forth, right? Allah calls himself Al-Kareem, Al-Hakim, Al-Azeez, Al-Ghafur, the most generous, the loving, the forgiving, the gracious, whatever, in the Quran. So they basically said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot have any qualities or attributes. When growing up in the Sunni tradition, they teach you at a young age that one of the articles of faith is to believe in Allah's asma and sifat, names and attributes, right? We're taught this at a young age, and some of us are like, where does that come from? Allah says about himself, Al-Ghafur Rahim, in the Quran. Khas. Why do I have to put this as an article of faith? Well, it is precisely because of Mu'tazili theology that prompted those who later call themselves Ahl-Sunnah Jama'ah to put that as an article of faith. You have to believe in Allah's names and attributes. Well, Mu'tazilah did not believe in that. Because they said, if I admit name attributes for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then I am basically saying that Allah acquires a quality. So if I said Allah is generous, okay. Is that human quality? Was that acquired by Allah in the course of His existence? Or is it as ancient and as eternal as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself? Now you might be like, what? Why does that even matter? Right? What mattered to these guys? A lot of people were killed because of this stuff. And it's so relevant, that's why we need to talk about it. They think that if you isolate Allah's qualities and say that Allah acquires, so He created Adam, is that when He became generous? Like before the creation of Adam, He did not have that quality? So if you said no, then it's just weird, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's God. He doesn't acquire qualities in the course of His existence. And if you said that a quality is as eternal as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again, is generosity Allah? No. It is only Allah that is eternal, so generosity has to be created as well. You see what I'm saying? So you cannot say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is generous. So for them, it is generosity, or karam, is not Allah's quality, it is just Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when Allah says Al-Aziz, Al-Ghafur, it is not that He acquired a quality. This is just something innate in Him, and hence the word unity, tawheed. Merging the so-called qualities with the entity that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I know that half of you are like totally, what is He talking about? That's fine. You don't have to feel bad about it. Number two, justice, al-adl. Right? Allah's adl. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in their judgment will never hold us accountable for things that we have not done, or things that we have not committed, or things that were imposed on us. So if you have if you have something that prevented you, literally prevented you, like if someone comes to you and ties your hands and puts a gun to your head and tells you, you can't pray Asr. I'll kill you if you pray Asr. And then you said, okay, I'll still pray. You can kill me if you would like. And then he literally like tied you up and kept slapping you on the face so you don't focus on your Asr. Literally prevented you from praying Asr. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot hold you accountable for this on the Day of Judgment. Said, what, you didn't pray Asr that day? Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is adil. He is, as a matter of fact, al-adl. He is the epitome of justice, subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, with this argument in mind, what they were trying to say is that Allah does not create actions in our life. He does not interfere. Because if He interfered, then He restricted your free will and therefore will not be able to hold you accountable for it. So whatever choices, whatever things that happen in our lives, whatever choices we make, there are our own choices. They are not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doing stuff for us. Do you understand where this comes? Now, out of all these cults, theological cults that existed, you know where that came from? Came from Qadariyya. Because as opposed to Al-Qadariyya, Al-Jahmiyya, and Mu'tazila, they're on one side, and the other side, the other extreme is Al-Jabriyya. Al-Jabriyya said, well, Allah does everything. He controls all of our actions, qada and qadar, like full time. So a human being is a leaf that is being carried by the wind here and there. We have absolutely no control over anything. Right? Total fatalism. The other extreme of that is the Qadariyya, and after the Mu'tazila, and also Jahmiyya in the middle, who basically said, no. Allah does not interfere at all in our actions, and therefore He is adil. Because the only way for Him to hold us accountable is by basically letting us do whatever we want, and based on that He judges us. Obviously, Imam Ahmad rejected that, and I'll tell you how in a second. Al-Wa'd wal-Wa'id, promise and threat. An article of faith with I'tizal. Whatever you do in the life of this world, you will reap the harvest of it on the Day of Judgment. Al-Wa'd, promise, if you do good, you go to Jannah. Al-Wa'id, threat, if you do bad, you go to hellfire. Right? So whatever work you do in this life, Allah will compensate you. There's no intercession, there's no shafa'ah, there's no intervention, whatever. Right? So if you commit sins and you don't repent, you go to hellfire and you're done. Not the Prophet Muhammad, not anyone can stop that, because again, Allah gave you His promise and His threat in the life of this world, and it ends at that. They had an intermediate position with regard to grave sinners, al-murtakib al-kabira, those who commit the major sins. Unlike al-Jahmiyya, who used to say, well, al-Khawarij used to say that as well, those who commit major sins will be eternally in hellfire. It doesn't matter who they are, they have basically abandoned Iman. They used to say, Mu'tazila used to say, خَرَجَ مِنَ الْإِيمَانِ وَلَمْ يَدْخُلْ إِلَى الْكُفْرِ. They quit Iman, they came out of Iman, but they did not necessarily enter into the territory of kufr either. If you ask me what that means exactly, my answer will be, I have absolutely no idea. Okay? Again, they say this like in the life of the world because you still have a chance to repent. But on the Day of Judgment, if you die in this state, you become kafir and then you eternalized in hellfire according to their theology. Al-amr bil-ma'ruf and-nahy an-munkar, commanding what is right and forbidding what is wrong, what is evil, is fard for al-Mu'tazila. Where does the createdness of the Quran come from? It comes from this simple notion that the Quran is not Allah, and therefore it has to be created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They had this understanding that the Quran was initially written down on al-Lawh al-Mahfuz, the preserved tablet in Jannah. And then when the Prophet ﷺ was sent with the message, the Quran was revealed. So there are two versions of the Quran for Mu'tazila. The one in Lawh al-Mahfuz and the one that was sent to the Prophet. I mean, it's the same Quran, but they existed in two different dimensions, so to speak. Both are created. Because again, it's the same line of thought. Allah at some point decided to write the Quran down on the preserved tablet. And since the word is not Allah, then it has to be created and not, they say, Allahu Qadim, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is eternal, and the only thing that is eternal is of course Imam Ahmad looked at all this and said, like, what the heck is wrong with these guys? It was just craziness for him, the utter craziness. He held the position that, which is the position of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and actually most of the Shia groups follow the same thing as well. And his position was, I want Allah to interfere in my life a little bit. I want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help me out, to give me a hand, to accept my dua. What's the point of dua then if Allah never interferes? If He never produces any actions in our lives, what's the point of making dua? On the other hand, I don't want Allah to leave me alone, completely on my own, by myself, having to manage my affairs in this life without any help. Just in order to hold me accountable. I don't want that either. And I don't want a God that controls my affairs 100% full time. I want to have 80% control, but Ya Allah, when I need you, I want you to give me a hand. Right? I want you to help me out. I want you to give me some guidance, and just put some good people in my way, and so on and so forth. And that is, our understanding of qada and qadr. The divine, I call it the divine tweaking of human affairs. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tweaks your affairs a little bit based on your dua, based on your intentions, based on your commitment and devotion and so on and so forth, by way of testing you. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala interferes in a certain way, not determining, but somehow shaping some of your choices, some of your actions, and that is, again, the understanding of mainstream Islam. This is not what Mu'tazila wanted to believe, and it is not what the other groups wanted to believe. Knowledge areas, and inshallah we'll take a couple of minutes breaks. Knowledge areas, obviously the biggest one was hadith. Secondary to that was fiqh. And one interesting thing about Imam Ahmad's career is that he loved calligraphy. Because he used to write down the hadith a lot. So he developed this incredible skill to write such beautiful handwriting that whenever he run out of money, becomes so destitute, he would apply for a local government job to just scribe things, to write things down for them in government records and so forth, because he, again, had such beautiful handwriting, but he did not pursue that as a career. It was mainly hadith and fiqh. So we will take, inshallah, a couple of minute break, and then we'll come back to talk about his political environment and conclude, inshallah, our class. So please be back in about 4 minutes if you would like to just freshen up. All right, so we'll talk, inshallah, about, this is the last section, or the section before last in our lecture tonight, which is the political circumstances in the life of Imam Ahmad. And from that we will venture into the mihna, the big inquisition that took place, and into, inshallah, at the end conclude with the summation of his life. But again, Imam Ahmad was born under Abbasi rule. He was born in the reign of Harun al-Rashid. And he held this, a theologically inspired political position that that power, as I said with Imam Shafi'i last time, that power stays in Quraysh. He actually believed that the Khilafah stays with Quraysh and not other. Obviously, many of the scholars of his time, and I think many of us, would disagree with that notion. But that was his ijtihad, again, that the Khilafah stays in Quraysh. In addition to that, Imam Ahmad had a very interesting view about political power in general. That was inspired by his desire for stability and order. So he says that obedience to those in power is fard, right? And rising against them in rebellion is haram. Because the price that the ummah pays in the course of any rebellion is much harsher and much more severe than just keeping unjust people in power. It's really, again, I personally disagree with that. I think that many of you disagree. I think that, one of the main missions that brought Islam to this world was to rid the world of injustice. So to uphold political leaders with absolute power, who have the freedom to do whatever they want, I think that causes more corruption than anything else. And any blood and any life, in my judgment, again, is worth paying for. Because political corruption is the worst form of corruption in any given society. It's a corruption that starts on top and it seeps and disseminates into every corner of this society's existence. Into its morality, its economy, its social structure, everything. And without dealing with political corruption, without dealing with political again, I said that political corruption is the worst form of corruption. Without dealing with that, I think there's no possible way to reform any given society. So I certainly, and I think many scholars do the same thing, disagree with Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal on this one. But again, he thought that order is very important in and of itself. And as long as the hakim, the political leader, does not profess renouncing Islam and does not, do really corrupt things, it is better to leave that person in power. On the other hand, which is ironic, if that person is challenged by someone else and that other person managed to usurp power from whoever was in power, it becomes haram for anyone to challenge that guy's power, including the man that was in power before. You see the logic, the reasoning? So if it happened that someone was bad enough and did something haram and challenged whoever is in power and became the Khalifa, then just let it be. Don't touch it. We've had enough trouble, kind of thing. Which, I can appreciate if any of you disagree with that. Obviously, it doesn't really, with our modern sensibilities and political activism, it just doesn't seem to be right. But that was his position that he actually pronounced with sincerity. And he took a pro-Abbasi position, despite the fact that they did these horrors to him, but he took a pro-Abbasi position because, hey, the Abbasis, they are from Quraysh, and they have power, and the Ummah gave them bay'ah, pledges of allegiance, and just you should not challenge. And actually you should obey the Khalifa in any matter as long as it's not haram. And subhanAllah, he himself took the brunt of all of that in the course of his life. By the way, just a quick note on Imam Ahmad's position or stance with regard to the fitna between Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib and Muawiyah. He actually took a pro-Ali position on this one, not necessarily because he was supportive of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib. Just like Malik, if you remember, Malik was a bit ambivalent about Imam Ali. Unlike Shafi'i and unlike Abu Hanifa, who really loved and supported Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib and upheld his khilafah, Imam Malik did not even consider him to be from Khulafa al-Rashideen. Ibn Hanbal was a lot more lenient, but he supported Imam Ali not because he liked him, but primarily because he said, well, Ali ibn Abi Talib was the Khalifa, he received bay'ah from the Ummah, challenging him was wrong. Right? So he made Muawiyah to be wrong on such technical grounds, but not necessarily because he had, again, he thought that Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, which I think is an erroneous assumption as well, that, he was basically one of the main reasons of that fitna that divided the Ummah and caused so many problems, and he did not necessarily appreciate that. Again, like I said, with Imam Malik, I don't think that Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib had any choice. I don't think that he had the luxury to let people just come up with their own opinions right and left, and let's go after the assassins of this and the murderers of that, when the Ummah itself, is on the brink of destruction. So he needed to create government institutions and put things together first before we can deal with any criminal charges against whoever did what. So, again, that's one of the positions of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. You may choose to disagree. But here's the thing with Mihna, that inquisition. And as I said, it all started with the Mu'tazili theology that basically thought that the Quran was created. And it is interesting because the Khawarij believed the same thing. The Jahmis, some of the Shia groups believed in the same thing. Why did the createdness of the Quran as a doctrine became such an issue that Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal was arrested and tortured? Well, the answer to this question is Al-Ma'mun. Al-Ma'mun, the son of Harun al-Rashid, the Khalifa at the time, who was really a strange guy. So on the one hand, he's the patron of the arts and the intellectual adventures and translating Greek works and philosophy and so forth, the establisher of Dar al-Hikmah. But on the other hand, he subscribed to Mu'tazili thought at a younger age. And he was always worried about, sort of propagating those thoughts. Again, like I said, he was actually worried that one of Imam Ahmad's scholars would basically stand against him. So basically what Al-Ma'mun did was that he kept it to himself, and he started surrounding himself with some of the Mu'tazili, leaders. But here's the thing. Not all Mu'tazili theologians were involved in the fitna. As a matter of fact, most Mu'tazili theologians did not agree with what was the Inquisition that Al-Ma'mun orchestrated. They did not. Okay, we believe that the Quran was created, but not to the extent of going after everyone and forcing them to accept it. They did not like that, right? What drove Al-Ma'mun? Here's again, this is my own subjective analysis of this. I really think that it has to do more with power than it had to do with theology. Al-Ma'mun was the absolute leader, was the absolute monarch of the Khilaf, of the Ummah. We have to, unfortunately, accept that. He did not settle for absolute power in political matters. He wanted power in religious matters as well. He wanted to turn the Khilafah into a papacy. He wanted to become not only the Khalifa, he wanted to be the Pope. To decide in the political and the theological affairs of the Ummah. See, prior to that Inquisition, there was always this virtual separation between religious affairs and political affairs. The religious establishment, the ulama and the scholarship, always checked the state, but was not part of the state. So they say, separation between church and state or mosque and state. I really think it existed in Islamic tradition from day one. You always had the political institution that, kind of always keeps in mind the needs and the desires and the challenging and the moderation of the religious establishment. And you have a religious establishment that is independent of the state, because you don't want politicians to tell you what legal injunctions and what fiqh opinions you need to issue. So they were separate, and there would be struggles sometimes, but they were still, for the most part, separate. Al-Ma'mun wanted to remove that separation. And i'tizal for him was just a vehicle. He wanted to write it in order to control not only the political but also the theological affairs of the Ummah, and becomes the Pope. And that is why it was so dangerous for the scholars to accept something like this. So what does he do? He surrounded himself with two. One of them at least was really notorious wazir, a minister. His name was Ahmad ibn Abi Dawood. Was an extremely harsh and dominating and really fanatic Mu'tazili himself. And he inspired Al-Ma'mun to go after this process in a very interesting way. So basically created a list of questions, and he would send those questions to all of his magistrates around the empire, and invite the governors to bring in all the great influential scholars to their courts, and to start asking them the question and write down the answers. So all the governors, again, you're talking about the Abbasi Empire, stretched all the way from Morocco to the western frontiers of China, Africa, all the way into, closer to Istanbul. It was a massive empire. It was almost like one half the size of the United States. So you have massive reach, and he goes everywhere, and his governors collected 700 of the most notable scholars of their time. And he would bring them in, ask them the questions, just answer the questions of Amir al-Mu'mineen, just answer them. And then they would write stuff down and send the answers to Al-Ma'mun himself. A few months later, after he writes down the responses to those answers, he sends them to the governors, and the governors summon the scholars again, and they start telling them the Khalifa's opinion of their answers. As for so-and-so, who answered this question by saying that, let me show you how wrong you are, because it is 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And as for he who answered that question and said this, I'm going to show you why you're a liar and dishonest person, and you've lost all your veracity. And as for that person who responded to this question and said this and that, I will show you how big of an idiot you are. And he just kept responding to them. The Khalifa himself, right? As if there's nothing else in the empire to worry about. As if they had any other issues, or economy, or Byzantine Empire standing by the frontiers waiting for the slightest chance to attack, right? As if we don't have social justice issues or taxes to collect. That became the obsession of Al-Ma'mun. He sat down by himself with Ibn Abi Dawood, writing down responses and sending them to the magistrates. Governors received the responses, they summoned the scholars, they recite to them the Khalifa's response, and they say, if any of you does not convert right now and accept that the Quran was created, you're all going to prison. So imagine you're there, this thing that just came out of nowhere, a laughable idea, a laughable notion. And here's the governor, here's the, Mayor Johnson, right? Bringing you to his office, telling you, if you don't accept that the Atlantic Ocean doesn't exist, I'll put you in Yuba County jail. I don't know if he has jurisdiction over you. It's just probably a worse jail than Sac County. What would you do? What would you do? Most of them says, you know what? The heck. We'll just tell them whatever they want to hear. Right? It's not worth going to prison. Okay, the Khalifa says the Quran is created. Okay, fine. It was created. All right, don't sweat it. And there was, so let's say that, about 600 of them said, okay, fine, don't worry about it. We're not going to go to prison on this. And about 100 of them said, it was not created. This is insanity. The Khalifa needs to keep himself busy with other things. Why are we having this conversation? And the governor would say, unless you say the Quran was created, you're going to jail. He said, okay, fine, I'll go to jail. And then they go to jail. And they stay there for a week. So out of the 100 that endured and persevered and decided to go to jail for it, about a week later, 50 of them said, oh man, this is for real. This is serious. I am actually in prison right now. I could be in my masjid doing my halaqah or with my kids. I'm in prison because of this. Because this is absolute nonsense. Guards, the Quran was created. Okay, can I go home now? So 50 of them were released. And then 50 of them stayed. And then the Khalifa sends, a couple of months later, he sends another edict. Talk to those guys and tell them, unless you accept the createdness of the Quran as a doctrine, you will be tortured. So the governors come to them and say, guys, you're going to be tortured. You want to hear from me? I advise you to just tell the Khalifa what he wants to hear. Of course, scribes were standing there writing down their responses to send it to the Khalifa. He needed evidence. Guys, just tell him whatever he wants to hear. He's going to die one day, okay? Things are going to go back to normal. This crazy guy. So out of the 50, what would you say? I mean, they said, we're going to flog you. We're going to give you 100 lashes unless you say the Atlantic Ocean doesn't exist. Most people will be like, planet Earth doesn't exist. I'll say whatever you want me to say. But I'm not getting flogged. So about 50 of them said, you know what, whatever. We'll say whatever he wants us to say. And then they were released. 50 remained. And then guards started actually harassing them. You have to understand, guards had so much respect for those scholars. Probably when they finish their shift, they go attend the scholars' halaqah in the masjid, right? So they have so much respect, so they just like, okay, we'll just pretend that we're beating you guys. Just scream. Whenever I beat you, just scream. To the extent that Al-Ma'mun, to make sure that they're being tortured, he started sending some of his, elite guards from Baghdad to oversee the process of torture. So you have this just huge guy, like, 7-foot, massive guy, that is not from downtown or the west side, coming to your city, coming to your cell with a whip. What would you say? And you have been in prison for about 3 months now. So I would say at least about 40 of them said, oh my God, it was created. And then they went home, and about 10 remained. And then the guards, they started actually flogging some people. And then, oh my God, this is serious. I am being flogged right now. Okay, it was created. And only 4 remained. In this entire process, it took about 6 months, only 4 remained. Let me read their names. And I really want you just to honor their memory, because I think in many ways, their perseverance had a lot to do with what we enjoy today. Al-Husayn ibn Hamada, Ubaydullah ibn Umar al-Qawariri, Muhammad ibn Nuh, and he was the youngest, and the 4th was Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, 6 months ago. Again, Al-Hasan ibn Hamada, Ubaydullah ibn Umar al-Qawariri, Muhammad ibn Nuh, and Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal became serious. And Al-Ma'mun starting overseeing their torture by himself. And he would give like each and every one of them a few whips every day to just kind of get them to do it. You have to tell me that the Quran was created. And they say, well, we can't. We can't. Show us something. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal used to say this all along. Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, show me something from the Quran or the Hadith with which I can argue with. But I'm not just, again, my job is to transport the Prophet's ilm, not to issue opinions. Show me a Hadith that says something like this, and I'll say whatever you want me to say. But I cannot give you just an opinion. No, Ahmad said this. I can't. We started, torturing them and overseeing that torture, but it was still kind of not that severe torture. And then it was summertime, and Al-Ma'mun decided to go spend the summer in Tarsus, which was basically by the border with the Byzantine. And some people say it was Al-Harra, which is a small town right next to it. But anyway, it doesn't matter. It was basically his summer home. And he summoned the guards and he said, bring me those 4 guys to my house in Tarsus. I'm going to deal with them myself. Now it's getting serious for those 4 guys. So 2 of them, Ibn Hamada and Ubaydillah, halfway between Baghdad and Tarsus, they were like, this is getting too much, guys. We'll just tell them whatever they want to hear, and we're going to go back home. It has been almost a year so far. It's not worth it. And it was Ibn Nuh and Ahmad ibn Hanbal that decided to leave. And these guys were released right away, and they went back home. And on the way, a Bedouin comes, again, they were all in shackles, but a Bedouin comes to this caravan and speaks at night and whispers in the ears of Imam Ahmad. Never met him before. He said, Ya Imam, you're standing by this post almost virtually by yourself. The decisions you're going to make today will determine the future of this ummah. Don't back down. Don't let those crazy maniacs control the state and control our theology and control the deen. Don't let them do it. And Ahmad ibn Hanbal, he said, I've never met this guy, but his words really inspired me. And that's when he made dua at night. He stood up in prayer and said, Ya Allah, show me a sign. I am trying to preserve your deen. I'm standing against these guys who are asking me to really say crazy things. Show me a sign. Give me strength. If the Quran is not really makhluk, as they say, the Quran is not really created as those crazy guys say, Ya Allah, give me strength. And in the morning, he wakes up in the morning and the guards, receive a word that Al-Ma'mun died in Tarsus. Just on his own. Just died. So Ahmad was so happy, and subhanAllah, Muhammad ibn Nuh, and he was in his 20s, another muhaddith. He was very ill throughout the entire process. And those ruthless guards, they did not have any mercy. So they were basically dragging them, no access to doctors or hospitals or no good food, nothing. So Muhammad ibn Nuh grew extremely ill. And on their way back to Baghdad, because the guards were like, okay, well, what are we going to Tarsus? Or let's just go back to Baghdad. The new Khalifa al-Mu'tasim will handle this from this point on. Muhammad ibn Nuh became extremely ill, and when he was about to die, he whispered the same words in Ahmad's ears. Ya Imam, it looks like I'm done. I don't think I'll survive. You are the last man standing in this battle. Don't let them have their way at any cost, even if it costs your life. That'll mean something. Your shahada, your martyrdom will mean something, but don't yield, right? And Muhammad ibn Nuh died. And Imam Ahmad is the one who washed him and basically prayed janazah and so forth, and some of the guards prayed janazah. You would think at this point that, alhamdulillah, Al-Ma'mun died, now new Khalifa, new blood, new perspective. Interestingly, Al-Ma'mun had one article in his will for his brother, Al-Mu'tasim. You see this thing through after I die, at any cost, no matter what. You extract those words out of Ahmad ibn Hanbal's mouth if it means your life. Mu'tasim had nothing, and as they say, لَا نَخَى وَلَا جَنَى. He had no interest in this matter. He had no interest in theology. And he would summon Imam Ahmad and he would say, you know what, I don't really care about this whole thing, okay? I'm a pragmatic guy. But I made a promise to my brother on his deathbed that I would get those words out of you, and get them I will. I will torture you, I will cut you to pieces. I will do everything it takes to get those words out of you. And that's when a whole different process of torture started for Imam Ahmad, radiallahu anhu. Again, this ordeal took about 28 months for Imam Ahmad. 28 months from the point that Al-Mu'tasim took over, so a year before, another 28 months, he's in the midst of this. Every day they would bring him to flog him. Every day. And one of the Ramadans, obviously it was a couple of 3 Ramadans at least, but in one of the Ramadans, they invite Imam Ahmad and they try to give him water. These guards are trying to give him water because he's being tortured. And the Khalifa is sitting right there, Mu'tasim, by himself, observing the process. And they say, yeah, Imam, just take some water. He goes, what are you talking about? It's Ramadan. I'm not going to break my fast. Yeah, Imam, you're in your 70s. What are you doing? Just break your fast, it doesn't matter. He says, well, I will never break my fast. And then they take him to his cell at night and they try to, smuggle some water into the Imam's cell. And he says, unless you give water to every single person in this prison, I'm not accepting water. Right? And the guards would actually go against the orders and the commands of their supervising officers and give money because, again, a way of torturing people is denying them food and water. Abbas is used to do that. So they would go against the commands of their officers and give money to all the prison cells just to get Imam Ahmad to drink some water. Because they felt so bad about what he was going through that they would smuggle water to him. And Imam Ahmad, every day he grows stronger. One of those nights, a drunkard comes to him. Someone was just intoxicated most of the time. He says, yeah, Imam, I've been here for a year. And they flog me at least once a week. And I endure the pain. You know why? Because I love alcohol so much and I can't stop it. And if I can endure pain because of my love to alcohol, I think you can endure pain because of your love to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If I can do it, ya Imam, you can do it. SubhanAllah. Just signs coming to him from really like the strangest of people. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was sending him these signs. Right? You can't quit now. And Mu'tasim just came to a point where he was going crazy. What are we going to do with this guy? We can't kill him because there's going to be an uprising everywhere against the entire Abbasi dynasty. And we can't let him go because I need to save my faith. Yeah? Just say something. Hint at him. Just give me a hint that you are remotely agreeing with what I'm saying. He says, absolutely not. And another Mu'tazili theologian comes to him and said, okay, yeah, Imam, listen. We believe that there is the Quran in the preserved tablet, and then there is the Quran that was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ. Can you at least agree that the second version is created and not the first one? Just give us a little bit. And he would still say, absolutely not. Show me a hadith, or show me an ayah in the Quran that suggests such things, and I will accept. One day, 28 months later, after the Imam, doctors would come to the Imam and literally have to use scissors to cut parts of his skin and parts of his flesh from his back because, they wouldn't want it to get infected and so forth. And then they would let him heal for a couple of weeks and bring him back to the same process, and he would give them the same exact answer with all respect to the Khalifa. He never cursed. He never said, why is this happening to me? He never said, why am I... Again, imagine... The entire ummah gave up and you are the last man standing. What kind of strength do you need to have? What kind of commitment to stand by yourself against a wave that is that powerful, against a flood that is that overwhelming? It's just incredible. They would come to him and say, well, Allah says Ar-Rahman 'allama al-Quran. And they would say, well, he didn't say Ar-Rahman khalaqa al-Quran, did he? Right? They would say, well, Allah says in the Quran, Allahu khaliqu kulli shay. And then he would respond and say, well, Allah also says in the Quran, tudammiru kulla shay. Allah created everything, so you have to believe that the Quran was also created. And then he would say, well, Allah also says about the tornado that destroyed the people of Thamud, that the tornado destroys everything. It doesn't mean that it destroyed everything that was ever created. Right? Every argument they would come to him, he would find a response to it until Al-Mu'tasim woke up one morning and said, "You got to let him go. Just let him go." So they unshackled him and opened the cell door and said, "Yeah, Imam, you're free to go." That was it. Just go home. Don't give the khutbah. Don't address students. Don't answer questions. Just go home under house arrest. But nobody's going to touch you anymore. And Mu'tasim had to give up. 28 months later. SubhanAllah. A couple of months over 1 year. And every time they talk to him, Ya Imam, mashallah, later on, Ya Imam, you endured this great trial, this inquisition, you're so brave. And then he would weep and say, Wallahi, لَوَدَدْتُ أَنْ أَخْرُجَ مِنْهَا كَفَافٍ. I wish none of this happened. I wish I never had to be tested. I wish I never had to stand like that. I wish nobody knows my name or know who I am or be inspired by my character. I wish that none of that ever happened ever before. Ya Imam, do you hate al-Ma'mun? Do you hate al-Mu'tasim? You say, astaghfirullah. How would my hatred to them be of benefit to me? When I stand there and I know that my resentment of my brother caused him to suffer on the Day of Judgment, is that going to make me happy? I have nothing but forgiveness for them. They did what they thought was right, and that is enough for me. And he actually forgave al-Mu'tasim before he, radiallahu anhu, died. It's interesting, the very first thing Imam Ahmad did when he was released from prison and from house arrest, because again, he endured 3 khulafa, right? He was born under Harun al-Rashid, but he died before the Imam started his career. And then al-Ma'mun, and then al-Mu'tasim, and then al-Wathiq. Al-Wathiq was the one who basically gave up. And he said, this whole Khalq al-Quran thing, I'm going to give this up. And then after that, al-Mutawakkil, became Khalifa. So 5 of the Khulafa, that Imam Ahmad basically survived. But when al-Mutawakkil released him from house arrest, the very first thing he did, radiallahu anhu, was to visit an old friend. His name was Ishaq ibn Rahawi. And Ishaq used to live in northern Iraq. And he wanted to go and make sure that his friend knows he's okay. He didn't have internet, so it was not posted on someone's Facebook status that Hanbal was released. So it takes months for people to know what happened. So he travels and travels in his 70s, right, in order to visit Ishaq ibn Rahawi. And he arrives in this masjid, and it's nighttime, and he doesn't know where to go, right? He doesn't know where the Imam, where Ishaq is, and he needs to ask. And people just went to sleep, so he wanted to stay at the masjid. And then while at the masjid, he basically was asked to leave the masjid. So he decided to leave the masjid and try to find another masjid to stay at. And then he sees this old guy who was going home. It was the custom at the time, you don't see a stranger and just let him go. So he said, do you need a place to stay? Would you like to join me? He said, okay, fine. Imam Ahmad was in his 70s, so he didn't look like a scary guy or anything like that. So the man took him home, and then they were sitting down and talking and eating and so forth. And it was really dark in the city, so he told him, where are you from? He said, I am from Baghdad. He said, oh my God, did you hear about Ahmad ibn Hanbal? What happened to him? Was he released? And he said, well, I am Ahmad. Oh my God, I am Ishaq. And then they stood up and they both hugged each other. It's been 20 years before they saw each other the last time. And Imam Ahmad was, from the torture and everything that happened to him, he had changed. His face had changed. His facial features had changed. Ishaq ibn Rawi had grown so old that they would not recognize each other before they actually introduced each other to each other. And then he stayed with them for a few days. And on his way back to Baghdad, again, it was probably about 3 or 4 weeks on foot. So he stays at the masjid, and then it starts raining. You've probably heard this story before. It starts raining so heavily that I'm going to stay at the masjid, and where am I going to go? And then the custodian of the masjid comes to him, and he said, hey, you got to leave. I have to lock the door. And he said, I'm really sorry, but I have nowhere else to go. It's pouring outside. Can I just stay here? I'm sorry. You can't stay. And he said, well, I hate to say this, but I'm Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Never heard of it. Come on, please, let me stay. What am I going to do outside? I'm sorry, you have to leave right now. So Imam Ahmad, you know what? This is Allah's house. I'm staying in Allah's house. You can't push me. You can't take me outside. He says, oh, yes, I can. And he grabs Imam Ahmad from his leg. And he drags him outside the masjid, literally, and he throws him outside. Imam Ahmad, astaghfirullah, what's this world is coming to? And then he's just standing there totally lost by the entrance of the masjid. And then there's this, khabbaz, this bread maker, who was passing by. So he says to the Imam, you know, I'm sorry that this guy, he's so stubborn, and he has a job to do. He's just tubular thinking, so I'm sorry, I apologize. On behalf of everyone in the city, would you like to come to my house, you know, give you some food and stuff? He says, yeah, sure. He goes to the man's house, and Khabbaz, he's a bread maker, so he needs to make his dough at night and let it ferment until the morning, so you have, you know, a good dough to bake. So the Imam woke up in the middle of the night in order to do his prayer, and then to find that the man is already up, you know, working on his dough. And he's just staying in the room. He made wudu and you know, kind of started praying. And all he hears from the man was istighfar. Astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah, making istighfar. That's his tasbih. That's his dhikr. This is the way by which he mentions Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Imam was intrigued. You know, so he goes to the man after he does his prayer and says, hey, you know, tell me, do you do istighfar all the time? And the man says, yes, absolutely. That's the signature of my life. And Imam, by way of just testing him, he says, you know, have you found any fruit? Have you found good fruit, like good results for your istighfar? He says, Wallahi, I have never asked Allah to bless me with anything, and Allah did not give it to me. All of my dua has been accepted, except for one dua. I've been making this dua for a while, and Allah is just, you know, we're still working on it, I guess. So he said, what is your dua? He said, you know, I have always made dua to meet Imam Ahmad of Baghdad, and to just see him face to face, and to thank him for what he's done. Just wanted him to make dua for me and to talk to me. And then that's when Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal started crying. And he said, Wallahi, my brother, Allah accepted your dua, and He dragged me from my foot to you. I was dragged from my foot so that your dua is accepted. Imam Ahmad goes back to Baghdad, stays there for a couple of years, continues to teach. But again, the experience made him so frail, and in 855, at the age of 77, Imam Ahmad passed away. Al-Mutawakkil and the Abbasis, by way, I think, of apologizing, they felt so guilty. They wanted to turn Imam Ahmad's funeral into like a national event. They say that over 300,000 people attended the funeral of Imam Ahmad. That's a huge number, by the way, back then. To the extent that in the city of Baghdad, every corner, every street, every road, every avenue was filled with people standing in rows, praying janazah on the Imam when he passed away. Some narrations say it was all the way up to 850,000 people that attended his funeral. And basically, people continued to come to Baghdad to pray janazah on Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal 6 or 7 months after he passed away. They would still travel from other places. Once they hear that Imam Ahmad passed away, they would travel all the way to Baghdad just to pay their respects and pray janazah. And as I told you earlier, most of the scholars of Iraq at the time, when they came and attended his janazah, there was almost this universal agreement that after the Khulafa al-Rashidin and Umar ibn Abdul Azeez, you know, the just Umayyad Khalifa, Ahmad ibn Hanbal basically comes next. And that's how the legacy of Imam Ahmad was created. Sorry, I went a little bit over my time. I want to give you guys a chance to ask questions. We still have about 10 minutes. But that technically concludes our lecture for tonight. Jazakallah khair for enduring 3 hours listening to this. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inspire each and every one of you with the great qualities and the life of this incredible and inspirational scholar. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless each and every one of you for going out of your way to learn the knowledge of the deen. Jazakallah khair. And inshallah you can take some questions if you